Welcome to our posts. Today we will see stories of r/malicious compliance. Won't compensate me for my fence? Then compensate me 100 times as much for my crops. The malicious compliance in this story is not mine, it's my brother-in-law's. Some of the details may be slightly off, but the overall story is true. My brother-in-law grows avocados in California. Several years ago, a portion of his ranch was ravaged by a wildfire, or so he thought at first. When the smoke cleared, it became obvious that the fire was caused by an electrical line that was blown over by strong winds and had landed on his fence, catching it on fire. Since he had been planning on diversifying his crops anyway, he decided he'd simply replace his fence, replant, and move on. To that end, he called up the electric company that owned the downline and asked them for about $10,000 in compensation to replace the fence that had been destroyed by their electrical line. They denied any and all culpability in the matter and told him that he should sue them if he didn't like it. What the electric company didn't realize was that my sister, his wife, works full-time as a corporate attorney for one of the largest utilities in California, defending against cases just like this one. At first she was concerned that this utility was a subsidiary of her employer, in which case there would be a massive conflict of interest. Apparently legal departments frown on their employees when their husband is suing them. Go figure. Thankfully, after some investigation, she realized that the utility in question was completely independent of her employer, and at that point the gloves were off. My sister didn't represent her husband because she's typically on the other side of these cases, but she did advise him on everything he needed to bring to court to win his case, and she helped him find a very reputable lawyer with a solid record of winning cases like these. Not knowing what they were up against, the utility persisted in refusing to negotiate, hoping that by forcing my brother-in-law to trial, he would simply give up and go away. Spurred on by my sister's insistence that he had a solid case, he called their bluff and went to trial. As it turns out, California takes agricultural damage very seriously, and the court conducted its own independent investigation. It estimated the total damages at around $335,000, which is over 33 times as much as my brother-in-law had asked for initially. Furthermore, there is a law in California that awards triple damages in cases where agriculture is impacted, so the utility that had been unwilling to negotiate over $10,000 was now on the hook for over $1 million in damages. When all was said and done, my brother-in-law confided to me that he would have gladly settled for the $10,000 in arbitration and that it would probably have taken him over a decade to even sell $1 million worth of crops. The utility had to have their day in court, though. Next story. I was forced to eat at fancy restaurants for a month. Many years ago, I got put on a work assignment for months that required me to travel to New York City and stay every Monday to Friday. I was assisting a company manager with a project and my hotel was near his regular office in the theater district. If you are not familiar, the theater district is heavily built for tourists. Restaurants are generally kind of fancy and expensive. There were really not any quick and cheap options for dining in that area. The company had a generous meal policy of up to $30 to $40 meal for travel expenses. I did use that for a bit, but the food got to feeling too indulgent and kind of ridiculous given it was an extended assignment. Also, I was working really long hours and did not want to go sit in restaurants. I just wanted to go watch TV and sleep in my room. So after the first week or so, I instead went to a grocery store on Monday night. I bought some basics for cereal, sandwiches and snacks, and some frozen meals I could microwave for lunch in the office. It cost about $60. I then took a few cans of soda from my hotel fridge to make room for my weekly food purchase, and returned them before checking out at the end of the week. And that was it for food costs, with an occasional meal out here or there. I did the same the next 4 weeks, submitted my expense report at the end of the month. You know where this is going. A lady from accounting called and refused to reimburse my expenses because $60 is more than $40, the max allowance for a meal purchase. I explained that it covered 5 days of food but was told it didn't matter. I then spent the next month trying all the food in the neighborhood. There really were not any cheap options. I went out to eat a few mornings, lunch whenever I found time, and dinner absolutely every day. I could have bought a few installments of groceries, but the once/week shopping convenience was part of why I'd wanted them. It had also seemed wasteful for me to go out for an expensive meal every night for long-term travel, but now I'd been told that was preferred by accounting to my grocery bills. The next month, I got a call from my NYC manager asking how I'd run through more budget every week of the month than the entire month before combined. I explained the grocery situation, and he thanked me and hung up. About 10 minutes later, that same lady from accounting called me to tell me they'd pay my still not reimbursed grocery bill and any going forward as long as the daily amount averaged for the week was under the aggregate meal allowance. I happily returned to a more reasonable diet. Next story. You want to make things fair? I'll show you fair. A couple of weeks ago, my kids and their neighbors decided to have a bake sale. We live in a tourist area with high foot traffic, and the kids make a killing. I tell the kids I ought to charge them for the labor. I said I'd help bake and ingredients so they learn the concept of net gains, but instead I'll donate to their cause, and just to bring me back the money I lent them to make change. I love seeing the kids be entrepreneurial, work so hard, and get so excited at their success. After a couple of hours, the neighbor's son decides he's bored and wants to go home, so he tells my kid, "When you're done, come by and deliver half the money." Mine says, "Hey, that's not fair. If you're leaving, we should split the money now." Mind you, the bulk of their sales was my baking. Neighbor kid gets super pissed, but mine sticks to their guns. They split the money and the kid leaves in a huff. Mine comes in a few hours later, having lugged home all the gear and cleaned up, annoyed that the neighbor kid got annoyed at them. Then I get a knock on the door. It's the neighbor's mom, with the kid, who is still pouting. Mom's holding a receipt. Mom explains that they purchased a bunch of stuff for the bake sale. It cost a lot of money, and it's not fair that my kid is making money off their stuff, and that they should be compensated for what they purchased. The receipt lists a bunch of items I immediately see they didn't use, like 2 boxes of cereal, when they used one, napkins that I'd ended up providing, but whatever. And never mind that her son went home early and left mine to clean up. And never mind that I'd been churning out batches of cookies all morning. I'm irked they've taken what was a fun, cheerful day of kids making money hand over fist, and shown up at my door making me engage in a super awkward conversation because they assume their kid can't be wrong. So I say, of course, and fetch my receipts. I sit down and, in front of them, and out loud, calculate the cost of lemonade and cups used. I calculate the cost of flour, sugar, chocolate chips, vanilla and butter per batch of cookies, multiplied by the number of batches made. I toss in the baking soda for free, so generous. I even subtract the value of leftover cookies. Did I mention I made a lot of cookies? The neighbor kid has to fork over $23. They got pretty quiet all of a sudden. I thanked the lady for making sure things were fair, and offered her a plate of cookies to take home. She declined. The end. Next story. Hearing aids is not equal to earbuds. This happened a few years ago, around the time I was 17. I had just started working at a smallish cafe run by a well-known family in our area. I knew some people who had worked there before, and they told me for the most part the owners were great, very chill and laid back when it was slow, and normally weren't bad about breathing down the employees' necks. Their oldest daughter, who also helped run everything, was the one who was very peculiar, and we'll call her Karen. I am officially diagnosed with a hearing deficiency, not enough to be considered deaf, but more than hard of hearing, so I wear hearing aids. My first day before we opened, my coworkers asked me if they could do anything else to help me out, and we eventually started talking about the hearing aids in general. While talking about everything, I mentioned they had Bluetooth capabilities so I could play music through them. Not that I would, but I could. Karen had been in the room at the time and said, "You can't wear those, no earbud policy," and tapped on the policy's paper on the wall. I protested, explaining they're hearing aids and not earbuds, and that I wouldn't be using them to listen to any music while I was working. Her reasoning was I didn't need them because I wasn't considered fully deaf, and I was doing this to get around the no earbud policy, directly quoting when I said they could play music. I can't wear them? Okay, let's see how this goes. Placed them into the case in my bag and started my shift. I couldn't understand my trainer, couldn't hear the customers, couldn't hear when orders were called to be sent out. Things were going extremely slow, a couple of warmed pastries burnt since I wasn't able to hear the timers. Simple sentences had to be repeated multiple times, with people basically yelling at me just for me to be able to piece a few words together. I guess the cherry on top was me ignoring one of the owners when she tried speaking to me. Karen came up to me and tried addressing me about it, until she finally realized what was going on after she had repeated herself 5 times. By the end of that shift, I was allowed to wear my hearing aids, no questions asked. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, make sure like, comment, share and subscribe the channel or posts.